personalized to where it doesn't hurt to share it anymore. But being vulnerable is like you're still in that process of sharing it.
Yeah. So the openness part is you're still in a pretty safe position in terms of openness. In vulnerability, there's still risk.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Anything else? Okay. I will forewarn you, if you haven't been on Blackboard lately, groups start up next week. They start up a week from today. So the groups, because this is such a large class, and I looked all over campus to try to find some place for us to meet, and ran into brick walls and other things that left me feeling like, this is not worth it. I landed on a solution with Dr. Shanks over at the counseling center, and I think we're going to be able to pull this off where if you go into Blackboard and go to groups, you've all been assigned to a group. It's all random assignment. I let Blackboard figure it out. And so I'm going to be leading one group, and then we're going to have 3 different groups over in the common area over there. It's a big enough area that you can be in a corner with the group that you're with. And I think I'm reasonably sure that, and Dr. Shanks is too, that the sound won't carry, and you'll be able to have time to do that with your group. So, so be sure to get on Blackboard and check it out so you know where you're going next Thursday. The only kind of bump in the road is going to be, I think it's the 21st of February. We're getting booted out of here by the Board of Trustees. So I'm not real sure what we're doing there. We may meet out in the lobby for all I care. So just make everybody else uncomfortable. So I'll figure that out, how that goes. So just be preparing. I told you at the very beginning this was coming. It always feels sudden when it's announced that it's next week. So if you can't figure out what group you're in or something, just email me and I'll be able to give you a hand with that. I've used groups before in my grief and loss class, and I think we've got it in such a way that you can do this. You do it every week from here on out, which was my original design for a class like this. So, and it's time really for you guys to process what's going on. The benefit of having the counselors involved, and even me, I'm signing, I don't know what exactly this means, but I'm signing some kind of waiver that allows me to function outside of Title IX, which means that anything that's said in any of the groups is completely confidential, and and the counselors over there carry the same kind of cone of secrecy kind of thing. So you're not going to get in trouble or anything. So that's what's coming. Okay. What I want to finish, I've got the audio working miraculously. So we're going to finish up with the boundary stuff, and then we'll go into one last thing that I want to get nailed down before we launch into, what's the issue with grace, what's the issue with shame. That's next week. And then the week after is when we dive into the stained glass self stuff. And so, yes, ma'am.
I just have a clarifying question. When we met, just the 2 of us, did you say that, so in our groups, if people were to share something, is it still under, the whole confidentiality thing where if, other students can't go say stuff to, other people at CCU, students or staff members, but, if a student were to bring something to a staff member, it wouldn't be valid because it was under the setting of the counselor?
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. I was very, very, very explicit with Dr. Shanks that if she couldn't guarantee me that, we weren't going to be doing it through them, which would have meant me doing all the groups. which I've done too. So yeah, she guaranteed that, and I certainly will have the interns, when they open the group meeting, make it excruciatingly clear that is the expectation of these groups. So anything that's said there stays there. If it goes outside, then it becomes an issue with the group. And so I've led groups for a long time, and the confidentiality of the group is such a high value that when somebody talks to somebody outside of the group about what's going on in the group, then they can guarantee that they're going to be talking about it in the group about how they made the decision to break that promise. So, and that's my expectation for these groups too. So, any other questions or anything? All right, let me pray to get us started, and then we'll jump in here. Father, guide our hearts, guide our thoughts as we continue to consider how to engage relationships with one another in a healthy way. Sometimes we hear healthy and we're not real convinced that it's godly, but at the same time, you chose to take on human form, which made you fundamentally separate. And Jesus reflected for us so many times the ability to say no, and the ability to discern people's character, and the ability to do the very things that we've been talking about in a class like this. And so as we continue on with this particular material, just allow us to resist the temptation to beat ourselves up because we don't seem to ever do it right, and be willing to learn and to try it again in a different way, and continue to learn in that sense. That's why your grace not only saved us, but it enables us to participate in our redemption. And that's what's really, really important here. So thank you for your love for us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so here's the video I didn't get to show you. Like I said, when you let production teams run wild, this is what results. And these guys are nuts. They were part of the production team of a church I was a part of. And that's what they put together. This video wasn't designed for what I'm using it for, but it is a very, very powerful example of somebody that doesn't have very good boundaries. Okay? Here we go. Well, maybe. If I get foiled again by this, I'm going to be really ticked.
Funding for this program is made possible by a grant from the Fake British Accent Guild and viewers like you. Meet Greg Samaritan, a man like many men, well, occasionally feeling the pressure of living up to the standards put upon him by his father and his father's father and so on. Does it go deeper than that? We recently sat down with Greg and asked him about his heritage.
I am of the direct lineage of the Good Samaritan. Actually, my great grandfather was the Good Samaritan that Jesus talks about in the Bible. The story goes that a man was beaten and robbed by the side of the street and left to die. My great grandfather then came upon this man on the side of the road and decided to help him. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Just saw this kind of messy right here.
Being a good Samaritan at all times to all people, it turns out, can become quite taxing.
I'm basically a nice guy. I care about others. But I like a little time for myself. That's good. You know? Because every day I'm doing at least 4 or 5 good deeds when I could be enjoying my time in other ways. I guess it's in my blood. I don't really have a choice. I find myself in situations where I need to help others, and and I oblige. I follow what my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather did before me. No problem. No problem. I've got some time, and I'd love to help. So, actually, you know what? She was before me. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Seriously, go ahead. But, yeah, no problem. No problem. I don't even know what I want yet. I could just have one day a week where I could be selfish and worry about me, have some me time, you know, and take the phone off the hook, because people call me all the time wanting to. Hold on a second. Sorry, I've got to take this. Hello? Oh, hey. No, that's no problem. I'll be right there. It's my friend Tom, and he's moving today.
I decided it was time to challenge some of Greg's assumptions about his heritage.
Have you ever heard of parable?
Sure.
It's a story that Jesus often told to make his point. And from what the Bible says, the Good Samaritan is a parable. It's a story.
What are you saying?
Well, it's a story that Jesus told. It's not something that actually happened in the Bible per se. Are you aware that that's true?
Hold on. Are you trying to tell me that my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is not a real person? Do you want to see my driver's license? It says Greg Samaritan. It's my last name.
And all this time you could have been doing what you wanted. You chose to do it.
You know what? I choose to end this interview. This interview. So, do you want some tea or anything? I have some cold cuts. I can make you a sandwich.
It wasn't easy for him to hear, but Greg chose to move on with his life and forever put away the assumption that he must, by blood, be a good Samaritan. Our film crew caught up with Greg a week later to follow his progress.
Mr. Samaritan.
No cameras.
Mr. Samaritan.
No cameras. Get that out of my
I
face.
just want to take a picture. Just a picture.
You'll see what I'm really like.
Look at the miracle.
See, there's a lot about that probably pokes at any one of us, whether or not it's our motivation to help other people. We look at, well, what after all, that's good, right? Yeah, it is. But if we keep our eyes on what Jesus wanted us to pay attention to, and that is the nature of our heart, that we can do good things for not so good reasons. Not that they're evil, but they're reasons for me rather than for the other person. And boundaries, that's where the problem comes in, is when we start talking about this stuff and it starts rocking people's world and it turns upside down, suddenly we're having trouble. I mean, it's like Greg after he found out that his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather isn't the good Samaritan, and suddenly everything changes. And I think that points to the fact that when we start to learn some of this stuff, we're thrown into some measure of kind of disorientation, and then what we do within that disorientation, we throw everything out, rather than parsing through some of the decisions we've made, how we go about doing those things. And that's the process of growth. Shame sends us right off the edge, and it's all down the tubes, and nothing is ever going to be okay again. On the other hand, grace gives us a space to be able to do things differently and try different things. So we already talked about this with the different aspects of this. And we already talked about the boulders and backpacks and the examples. That's where we ended. Let me back this up. That's where we ended. The one thing I wanted to highlight that I didn't last time is that the distance and time are a lot of times related to one another. Because in some sense, when we need to get some distance from somebody else, it's not geographical distance. It's time distance. I need a break or whatever the word might be. The challenge, I think, is that we can get distance, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything's going to change. I just get a break, but that's about the extent of it. And so a lot of times people use these kind of boundaries as weapons with people. And then they say, I've had enough, I can't do it anymore, and I need a break. But then when they get the break, nothing changes. They're not reevaluating really what they're doing in the relationship that might have contributed to the situation that they're in. That's what boundaries allows us to do. Because during the height of, and again, let's go back to the metaphor of the yard idea, okay? At the height of grass growing season, every week I look out my window and try to figure out if it's time to mow my lawn or not. I have to evaluate it to see that, and then I do whatever is necessary to maintain it. And that's the kind of cycle, if you will, or the rhythm that we need to begin to develop in terms of evaluating what's going on with the well being our heart. And out of that well comes all the things that we tend to pay more attention to than what's going on in the well itself. So what we have then is a little bit like what we did with the safe people. We talked about these three different groups of people, the abandoners, the critics, and the irresponsibles. Now, I made mention to you then that no one is ever one of those things. And in a lot of cases, somebody can be all three, depending on the relationship they're in or the situation they're in. The next four categories we're going to talk about, profiles, if you will, with boundaries, is exactly the same thing. Is people will be these in different situations. A lot of times they'll be different in a intimate or more romantic relationship than they will be in other relationships. So the first one here is called the compliance. This would be Greg. He says yes to everything, and including things that are bad for him. You noticed in the interview he said, I just wish I could have me time. Well, you're not going to get me time without saying no. You're just not. And like I said when we were talking about this last time, one of the most fundamental words in our vocabulary, a boundary word, is no. And a lot of times we won't say it because no means isolation and detachment. And if it's that catastrophic, then we will not say it. So the compliance say yes to all sorts of things. They have very fuzzy and indistinct boundaries. They don't know what's me and what's not me. As a matter of fact, oftentimes they will distract themselves with other people's yards than take care of their own. And that comes with the fuzzy or indistinct boundaries we were talking about. They also assume that by minimizing the differences with people or maximizing the similarity with people, that's the basis of connection. What they do not understand, as a matter of fact, it probably threatens them, is that distinctions or differences with people, which are only possible if we talk about those differences, is really the basis of connection. I can't connect to somebody who's identical to me. I can't. We make believe that that's true, but that's not intimacy. Being enmeshed, being fused with another person is not intimacy. It's just me. I mean, if they is me, then I connect with them, and I'm still with me. Okay? So I have to have some boundaries in order to have any sense of intimacy, and these folks tend to see differences as a threat. And most of this is driven by fear. And I've already hinted at it when it comes to the fear of disconnection or the fear of people not being around or being alone or whatever. excuse me, and that's a lot of the landscape for people who tend to be compliant. The second category are the people that would fall into what we would call avoidance. Okay, not avoidance. Of course, being in the Rocky Mountain region, there's no difference. So the avoidance say no to things that are even offered to them that are good. So if you have any propensity for struggling with something or not being able to get something done, and somebody says, here, let me help you, and you say, no, that's fine, I can handle it myself. That would be avoidant behavior in this category. Generally, what they do in the back office in their head is they relativize their problem to everyone else, and generally their problem always becomes less because they relativize it to something always bigger than whatever it is they're dealing with. And so the relativizing of their problems is, I don't have it so bad. Somebody doesn't have a car at all. What am I complaining about? And that's the basis oftentimes of avoidant behavior. So they have a very hard time asking for help. And for them, boundaries are they're not fuzzy or indistinct. Boundaries are distinct walls that keep, generally, me safe. Because the minute I ask for help is the moment I run into vulnerability. I run the risk. If I ask somebody something, okay, and this is part of a bigger discussion that we'll have in a little bit here, is if I ask somebody something and truly am asking them that, then usually there are two answers. Yes and no. And in a lot of cases, we don't ask a question because we don't want the answer we don't want. Namely, no. And there's no freedom in that. And in a lot of cases, the avoidants tend to assume that if they ask, somebody would say no anyway, so they're not going to ask. Why subject myself to that? And so their boundaries end up being walls. Another category would fall in the category of controllers. This one is so important that we're going to spend a longer time talking about this in just a little bit today. But for controllers, they don't respect other people's boundaries. A boundary is simply a challenge to overcome. To convince people that they don't really mean no, to convince people that they are really worthy of coming past their boundaries after all anyway. And they generally are always trolling for somebody else to take responsibility for what they need to take responsibility for. So when we're talking about boulders and backpacks, in a lot of cases, people that are trying to offload their backpack to other people oftentimes do so by being controlling. It's like, asking somebody to do something for you, and the person says, I really can't do it. And then we play the card, well, I did it for you. We may not say it that way. Or, a parent might imply that. Or, don't you love me? And so that oftentimes is a dead giveaway to no is not an acceptable answer. And controllers, it isn't. A lot of the things that go on in their lives, they're always looking for, in a sense, and this is not intentional at all. This, in one case, it might be. We'll talk about it here in a sec. But they're always, in a sense, looking to offload to other people. Generally speaking, for most of the people that I've talked to, they don't err on this side. They err on the other side most of the time. So when we take controllers, we've got two different kind of subsets. The first one is you all know. You can see these people a mile away. They are dominating, intimidating. They don't listen to people. They will get their way no matter what. They will wear people down until they get their way, whatever that is. They're the aggressive controllers. And these people, you can all, like I said, we can always identify who these people are. This is not hard. You might have had a boss like this, or a coworker like this, or anything like that, and they just with their presence, or the kind of questions they ask, or the kind of ways that they interact with people, they are intimidating. And because of that intimidation, they get people to do a lot of things for them. And the moment somebody stands up to them, this is the interesting thing about people that are prone to doing controlling things, is that if I judge that the person who's standing up to me is more powerful than me, I will resort to manipulation instead. Okay? So they can be, obviously they run over fences, they can be very manipulatively verbal in the words that they use and the manipulation they use, but essentially the bottom line is no one has any place to have a boundary or to say no. That is completely unacceptable, no matter what they say. No matter what they say. So we have the aggressive controllers, and then we have the manipulative controllers. Quite honestly, the aggressive controllers are probably more honest, because they don't hide the fact that they're trying to get you to do what they want you to do. Manipulative controllers, on the other hand, are far less honest, and they influence, they persuade, they make a case for, and generally there's only one acceptable answer here. And that's the manipulative controllers amongst us. They manipulate the circumstances. They are experts at making circumstances look like it's just a logical thing to do to follow along with what they're asking us to do. And you know, you could probably say that there are a fair number of people that are in sales and retail that are in this category. Okay? There are a lot of people that aren't. I'm not broad brush stroking these folks at all. But there are a lot of people that know how to manipulate people into buying whatever it is they want them to buy. Why? Because the minute somebody says no, they change the terms of their agreement or what they're trying to talk to them about. Yeah, Shelby?
Can they be both aggressive and manipulative?
Well, I think they interchange a lot of times. Because I mean, if I'm in the presence of, like I said, if I'm in the presence of somebody that I perceive as more powerful, having greater status than me, then I will resort to being manipulative instead. The key to understand this big, broad category with controllers is no is not an acceptable answer. Their methods change all the time. And that's kind of the key that we're talking about here to understand this. Now, the third category is what we call non-responsives. Non-responsives do not hear the needs of other people. They run life by the phrase, if you don't like how you feel, change them. Life's tough, so get over it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. In one of my daughter's more cynical stages, she used to say, cry me a river, build a bridge, and get over it. And that's kind of what a non-responsive is about. They have a very critical spirit. They end up being in a position where they're the ones evaluating what your needs are. And that overlaps with what we talked about with the critic group when we were talking about safety. That's why boundaries and safe people and that material are so important to do together. Because safe people accept no for an answer. Safe people empower people to be free. Okay? And why is that? Because they're very, very clear about what is me and what is not me. So when I empower somebody, I am empowering the other person to own more of themselves, not more of me, if you will. And that's the controller kind of category that we're talking about. So as a general rule, they tend to be very absorbed with what they need. So that it's hard to admit that other people have needs that might actually be greater than theirs. That's where the problem comes in. So what does that tell you? They tend to relativize things too. But they always relativize in their favor. Their needs are always more important than other people. Now, we live in the kind of culture and the kind of society that nobody wants to appear that selfish. So they won't say it openly. But they'll act it. And they will enact it in their relationships and so forth. So when we're in relationships sometimes with somebody that's in this category, this is the category that oftentimes will trigger shame in us. Because we end up saying, I guess I don't count. I guess I'm not enough to rate that my needs are important. So the non-responder, we've got 4 different categories then, okay? We got compliance, we got controllers, we got non-responsives, and we got avoidance, okay? And those categories are all, like I said, people can be numerous ones of these. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of situations, what I've seen is that generally speaking, when we get into a relationship that is very, very, very important to us, or in a romantic relationship, a lot of people become compliant because they don't want to lose the relationship. And the thing I want you to keep in mind, because we're going to talk about control here in a second, is that compliance are every bit as controlling as controllers are. Every bit. But they don't look that way. Okay? Now, let me give you an example. When I was working in the hospital, I worked with adolescents, and I had all sorts of kids that would come into the unit, and we had a vast diversity of adolescents that were in this particular group. And in this particular group, we had a guy that was going to be sent off to residential treatment because he was a sexual predator. And he probably wasn't going to change anyway. And we had a number of girls in the group at the same time that had been sexually abused. And so in order to help them understand about power and control and all those sorts of things, and I didn't use him as an example, but I want to give you kind of a context. I picked one of the other guys, as big of a guy as I could find, and one of the smallest girls I could find. And what I did was I asked her to lay down on the ground with her elbows on the ground and him to stand over her with his foot over her. Okay? So her elbows are on the ground, she's holding his foot. And I look to the rest of the group and say, who has more power here? Who has more power? Anybody want to make a guess? Why? She has, but when you actually look at it, who looks like the victim? She does. That's how compliance work. Okay? They have all the power. And if he pushed down, she had the floor to hold her. She probably could have held a lot of weight. He was off balance and really unable to push down with any force. And if he did, all she'd really have to do is just twist, and he'd be off balance and off to some other place. Compliance operate that way. They look like they're being put upon by everybody around them, but they maintain a certain level of power, partly because of how they think about the situation. So don't be deceived about controllers that are dominating, intimidating, yep, we got that. Manipulative, yep, we got that. But there's a lot about boundary stuff here that we're talking about that has embedded in it the discussion we have to have about control and what it actually means. So if you were to put it into some kind of table that makes it easier to remember these things, you can have 2 different columns that the person can't say no or yes, and the person can't hear no or yes. And when we put it this way, who can't say no? The compliance. That's right. Who can't hear no? The controllers. It is very often that I have seen people in complementary relationships like this, a compliant and a controller. Because a controller can't hear no, and they get into a relationship with somebody who can't say no. And so if somebody of these two learns boundaries, the whole relationship falls apart. It really does. So, who can't say yes? Who can't say yes?
Non-responsive.
Yes, the non-responsives. They can't say yes to a need that they see. And then, of course, the last one is who can't hear yes is the avoidance. Okay? It's an easy way to begin to remember it that way. There's more to it than that, obviously. Okay? There is. But it's important in the context of there are certain people, in terms of how they handle their boundaries, that trigger shame in us or might trigger grace in us. And when we spent our time talking about safe people and the kind of people we want to be, that's what we're talking about. Is safe people trigger grace in us. They give us permission to learn. And you know how they do that? They say very simply, yeah, me too. I get it. I've had the same problem. And I'm still trying to figure it out. That triggers grace. And the one thing I will tell you in a larger context is that besides all of the theology around Jesus coming to save us and all of that stuff, okay, we had a God who said, me too, because he took on our form and experienced all that we experience in our form. God didn't have to do that. He could have just said, yeah, they're all justified. But he said, I'll take on form, and not only will I take on form, I will enter the world in such a way that I am rejected by people from the beginning of my birth. Now, and again, put it in context, folks. A little Jewish boy born out of wedlock does not walk around the neighborhood people saying, oh, Jesus, it's so nice to see you. No, he walks around and people whisper, that's the bastard child of Joseph and Mary. This is the God we serve, that knows what it feels like about all the very things that we're talking about here. What we experience are the implications of these things. Yes, Sarah?
I was just wondering, like, with going over all these, because you're saying kind of everyone has a mixture of some, they have stuff that they lean to. But, like, would you say that it's possible if somebody acknowledges it enough where they're able to, like, realize that they have these boundary problems, that, like, all of them can change, like, can, like, adapt and
absolutely
have healthier boundaries or have, like, all of that?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, this was a conversation I was having yesterday, and that was, we have a choice about what we've done up to this point. Is either reread the script over and over and over again and repeat it, or rewrite it. And we can rewrite it. I think that's the foundation of our redemption. That's when Paul talks about work out your salvation with fear and trembling. We can rewrite it, but we have to be armed with information like this, and we have to be surrounded by people that kind of remind us of the grace that we have to learn and continue to learn. And we can absolutely rewrite it. I mean, when John and Henry released their book, Boundaries, me and two other friends of mine were asked to write a devotional for boundaries. And we wrote 365 devotional, one for every day of the year. And it was our effort to help people do what you're talking about, Sierra, is that every day they would open a new devotional, and either it would be talking about where my boundaries do I need to figure out what's going on here, or now that I know that I'm not doing it quite right, what can I do differently, or Now that I'm doing it differently, how do I maintain it? So every third one was one of those three themes. And it was built off of, very popular at the time, was and some of you guys may be familiar with it, the Daily Bread devotionals and things like that. We built it off of a very similar thematic scheme in putting that thing together. And that's what it takes, is keeping this thing in the middle of our rangefinder day in and day out, not using it to condemn other people. This is not about diagnosing the person next to you. This is about looking in the mirror. And the problem for most of us is we look in the mirror and the only thing we feel is shame, and we will never learn under those conditions. And that puts us in this kind of bind. And I get it. I mean, why am I doing this class at all? Is to make you thoroughly uncomfortable for 15 weeks, so maybe you'll do it a little bit differently. Merry Christmas. So, now, there are two other kind of broad things I want to mention, and then we'll get into are you asking a question?
What is the relationship between a compliant and an avoidant?
And an avoidant? Well, they can't say no, they can't hear no. Or can't hear yes, I mean. Usually they don't get along very well at all. Because, what is the compliant doing? They're offering all the time. Like Greg, it's like, I can't help myself. I got to fix all this stuff.
Do you think that can help the avoidant to learn to say yes? To help learn to say yes to help?
It depends. Because and a lot of this stuff, that's the bottom line, is it depends on the circumstances. Because if this person is trying to change their behavior, and this person's trying to change their behavior, and they offer, not because they're obligated, but they offer because they really want to help, and this person's kind of reflexive action is, nah, that's okay. They can forge that kind of relationship where the person can say, is that really what you mean, or is there something else here? But see, that takes a lot of effort to do. It's not impossible. I've seen lots of people do that. And when I say people can be different things, I'm reflexively an avoidant. I am reflexively that. I grew up as an only kid, and I did everything alone. I grew up to have that be part of everything that I did. So I have a really hard time when somebody offers to help me to say, yeah, sure. And it's to this point of such an automatic response that I'm not even thinking about why I'm doing it that way. But if I follow the stream back, what I find is, one, I'm uncomfortable being obligated to somebody. That's a well issue. And two is I feel inadequate. That's a well issue. That's not a behavior issue, that's a well issue. And so now it's gotten to be such automatic behavior that no, it's fine. And I may take extra time because I'm doing it alone. And one of the hardest skills I have ever had to learn in all of my life is delegation. One of the hardest things ever. So, but when you put me in a relationship with somebody that's really important to me, I become a compliant. Because I get afraid that after somebody really important to me went away, I'm not going to risk that happening again. So I'm not going to reveal what makes me different, that I see the world differently, I feel differently, all of those kinds of things. I do those far less than I used to, but boy, that was very much the case in my early marriage. Very much the case. And I didn't even have these terms to talk about that. So it can be done, but I think the context really matters about what these people are willing to do and what they're looking at and thinking about and those kinds of things. Okay? So the other two kind of big issues, is two different things we call functional boundary issues and relational boundary issues. Functional boundary issues have to do with getting a task done. So people who tend to get tasks done really very easily, they're list makers, they're really good at doing that. They don't have functional boundary issues. They're able to kind of restrain and rein in their own kind of needs to be able to do and get other things done. But in a lot of cases, the people that are really good with functional boundaries oftentimes struggle with relational boundaries, because they define whatever they do in terms of a task to be done rather than a person to relate to. The relational boundary issue person is the person who puts the relationship so far ahead that they're not real good at speaking truth directly to the other person because they don't want to threaten it. And they struggle to get things done because they're so busy talking to people and being with people. And that's not bad. But again, we have to talk about what do we cultivate within ourselves that allows us to balance, getting something done versus the relationship with a person. One of the probably most profound leadership models, and some of you guys have been in classes, I've taught a little bit of this, that I ever heard was it talks about balancing relationship with task. And the best leaders figure out how to balance these things, that the relationship is every bit as important as getting something done. And they can know how to flexibly kind of move depending on where the other person is and what their needs actually are. Okay? So these are secondary kind of depth of field kind of issues that we can take a look at and talk about. Now, where we go from here is this. And the one thing that has probably bored into some of your brains after having me in class is trust and control cannot coexist. Trust and control cannot coexist. So, most of what we're talking about in terms of being a safe person and in terms of boundaries has everything to do with my willingness to live with the freedom of others, or, which would be trust, or do everything I can to control other people. And that's controlling the environment, that's controlling their perceptions. As a matter of fact, this particular issue will be on steroids and in Technicolor on your first small group meeting. It will be everywhere. So what do you guys want to talk about? Silence for at least 10 or 15 minutes. And everybody will be doing the calculation about, well, I don't know these people, I don't want to talk about it, blah, 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 blah. And everybody's there. Everybody's there. Because it's part of being human, really. So, let me show you a couple clips, now that I've got this working. And they're illustrations, all right, of this big issue. They frame what it is we need to talk about, and we'll get through this as much as we can. If I don't get all the way through this, which is probably very likely, I will put the rest of this lecture up on Blackboard for you to watch it, because we got to keep moving. As much as I'd like to take the time to do this, I can't entirely. So, this is the first one.
I've been called a control freak. I like to think of myself as more of a control enthusiast. Perfect 177 degrees. And that's why this road warrior runs from National. I can bypass the counter and go straight to my car. And I don't have to talk to any humans unless I want to. And I don't. And National lets me choose any car on the aisle. Control. So, what's the word? Sexy. Go National. Go like a pro.
Hollywood has a way of bumbling its way into the truth every now and again. Here's another one. And this ties into the bigger issue that we have to talk about.
This last entry was a little disturbing.
kid with a magnifying glass. Smite me, O mighty smiter. Now, I'm not much for blaspheming, but that last one made me laugh.
Spider? Who are you?
I'm the one. Creator of the heavens and the earth. Alpha and Omega.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Bruce. I'm God.
Bingo! Yahtzee! Is that your final answer?
Our survey says
God! Bing, 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 bing. Well, nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with the apocalypse. Oh, by the way, you suck! You know what would have been a little bit more impressive, though? If you hadn't used the cheesy file cabinet illusion. Anybody with a brainstem can tell that that drawer is being fed through the wall from the other side. All you have to do is find the crease right around here. There is a seam here. Or a hollow spot.
Where? Through the drywall and concrete?
Yeah, that's a good one. Good one. Okay, how many fingers am I holding up?
Thou shalt not tempt the Lord.
If you can't do it, then it's cool.
3, 2, 4, 9, 6, 8, 1.
Okay. How many now?
7.
Aha!
You've been doing a lot of complaining about me, Bruce. Quite frankly, I'm tired of it.
Don't come near me seriously, but I'm back in the murder. One out and another one. I don't want to hurt you, but I will have instinct.
You haven't won a fight since grade 5, and that was against a girl.
Yeah, she was huge.
And the sun was in your eyes. Oh, there you go. Anyway, I brought you here to offer you a job.
Job, what job?
My job. You think you can do it better, so here's your chance. When you leave this building, you will be endowed with all my powers.
Now, the funny thing about that, the more that I've watched that, and now that I'm talking about it in terms of shame and grace, is that that file drawer is in your brain. And it has a catalog of all the things that make a case for why you shouldn't have grace. That's how we see God, right? I mean, Kyle Eidelman talked about it. We see God as chasing us down to collect a debt rather than giving us something of unsurpassing glory and a gift that we can't pay back. And even those words alone make grace an issue. So the bigger point is when we start talking about control, how do we play God? And the ways that we do this is in different ways. First of all, with our image. I'm committed to you thinking some way, making some conclusion about me. And I will do everything in my power to make sure you come to that conclusion. That's exactly why groups are such a threat. And vulnerability is such a threat. So I'll do everything, and it goes to the point of, and I think I've mentioned this to you guys as well, it's something that Dr. Shanks said to the faculty, and she was quoting a student that said, here at CCU, either you have to be perfect or a liar. So we have now a culture, and I buy that. We like to say we have a culture of perfectionism. I would rather say we have a culture of control. And we wonder why we have such struggles with intimacy and with being known. Because we're more busy, more concerned with what you're concluding about me than what I need to grapple with in my own heart. Whatever that is. So our image, And then we also play God just with other people. We already mentioned this in terms of compliance and controllers and so forth. All the things that we do to make sure people really don't run afoul or don't run aground or don't hurt themselves or whatever else. And in a lot of cases, we may not do this overtly, but we do it covertly. And that's in my way of thinking, and in all the years that I've talked about this, it's not overt control that's the issue. It's the covert control, the conclusions I make that if I, then you, if I, then God. And it's a closed universe. And so if I and you don't, then I'll redouble my efforts to make sure that it finally comes around to the picture that I have in my head. So with other people, with problems, and our problems, we see them as something to be fixed. And that there's nothing wrong with that on the surface of that. There is nothing wrong with that. But we go from addressing the problem, and most of the time we don't address it from a vulnerability point of view. We don't address it from dragging it into a relationship. We address it as, this is my issue, this is my thing, I need to deal with it. And that might be true, okay? That might be true. But at the same time, we've got this balancing act that we have to try to navigate, and that is, we were made for relationship. We were made for relationship. If we want to talk about you being an image bearer of God, we're talking about relationship. And when we cut ourselves off from relationship and make it something to be fixed rather than something to engage in, it's not a relationship anymore, and we've just objectified other people. So there are tools in our toolbox to be able to get things done. And the last one is what we do to control our pain. And pain doesn't mean overwhelming, excruciating. No. Anything that's uncomfortable would fall into this category. And more often than not, it's emotional and relational pain, not physical pain. People will do a lot of things about physical pain. And you know, that's why do we have an opioid epidemic? Because of pain and what people want to do to control it. There's an appropriate place for everything. There is. But at the same time, it can be used inappropriately, and that's what comes into play when we're talking about this whole control issue. Because the antidote, and I'll jump to the end and I'll put this up for you to watch the rest, but the antidote to control is trust. Trusting God in that person, empowering freedom, encouraging choice, and allowing people to choose, even, this is the real rub, even if they choose wrongly. And then it takes us into the material of talking about safe people. I can still be a safe person for somebody who chooses wrongly consistently. I can, if I have good boundaries. But if I take their stuff and make it my problem, now I'm playing God. And quite honestly, when I take on that role, I am fundamentally saying, by implication, God, I'll take it from here. You're not quite doing the job good enough. I'll be the Holy Spirit from here on out. And we have a way of nominating ourselves to being somebody else's Holy Spirit. And when we start doing that, we're saying, I don't trust you. I don't trust you, God. So, okay, I will put up this particular rest of this lecture so you can see more of the details of it on Blackboard so you can see it. And then next week we're going to jump into the crux of this course. So, see you then.